to be here.
Mr. President, hello.
Hello, Hikmet. How are you, Hikmet?
Long time no see. I'm okay. How are you?
Hope that we will overcome the difficulties with Corona, so that we will meet each other soon.
Yeah, we are all victim of the Corona. We have to be careful.
And Ambassador Susan Elliott is a president of the National Committee of American Foreign Policy.
I'm Mr. President. Good to see you.
Hello.
I feel like I've seen you a lot recently because, you know, I saw you earlier in the week at the Lanting Forum, which I thought was also very good. So
I think it was quite good, very good also.
Yeah. And we had, well, anyway, our discussion in our group about multilateralism and good governance was good. And we did have, you know, President Freiberga, she participated in that discussion. So it was a very good forum, I think. Even though I had to get up very early, this is the only downside of not being able to meet in person, is that we all have to make adjustments for the timing. And especially if you want to deal with Asia, if you're in the US, that means you either stay up very late or you get up very early.
It was quite impressive that President Vieira and Dr. Ismail, like, you know, underlined Nagorno-Karabakh conflict to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, no, they did. It was very good.
How they've been reacting to that. They've been like, you know, shocked that, you know, why someone is like talking about the conflict, but they accepted it.
Yeah, no, it was very good. Anyway, I see our Ambassador Sakuda is back now.
Yeah. Who is a mastermind also everything.
I seem to have some weird knack for Zoom that whenever I get into something that says reload your Zoom thing. So it's a sort of, it's kind of just like there's, you know, inevitably someone needs to unmute and inevitably somebody's phone goes off. This is just part of the sort of the Zoom culture that we all get to.
Well, I also think that Zoom just came out with a new version because I had to, not that I figured it out, but my staff told me, you know, you need to update your version of Zoom or it won't work well. So that could be your issue.
Susan, you're lucky you have staff.
Yeah, and I haven't seen them since March, so so
that's okay. They still exist.
They still exist, and you know what's very interesting. And he's actually one of our. I mean, we hired him for this because he can do this kind of thing. But I hired somebody on March 9th, or he started on March 9th, and we went virtual, you know, on March 15th. So I've only really worked in person with him for 3 days, but he's really worked out very well. And in fact, some of our staff he's never even met, but they work together online. So, so that's worked out well.
Yeah, I've noticed something else about Zoom. The lighting is different on different sites. I use the exact same lighting. Zoom makes it look overlit. WebEx is okay, and Skype is normal.
That's interesting.
And the way how they look like also, like, you know, the appearance is also very different.
Yeah. Exactly true.
For you.
Well, yeah, and you definitely have to have the light in front of you, not behind you. So you don't want to see my apartment because I'm in like my dining room.
But I'm using this one.
Turned into a television studio. I have all these lamps in front of me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Hi, Mr. President. How are you?
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. So
Hello,
everyone is.
Hello, Mr. President.
Well.
And I think that we are missing our head of the Balkan Mafia, how we call him, Zlatko.
Yeah, and also, you know, Ambassador Ordway is going to join us as well. He's former U.S. ambassador to Armenia, but has also served in Moscow. And I think you were sandwiched in between him, Dick, because he was ambassador to Kazakhstan before you, then you were ambassador, and then when you left, we had him come temporarily to be the chargé. So. So he knows the region very well.
I'm just texting all of them, like, to see where they are. And we have a lockdown because of the internet. And the Zoom is working well, but WhatsApp and Instagram and so on, they are not well.
We also need Zlatko, no? Is he coming late?
I'm calling him right away.
Yeah.
Okay, and Zuliev is coming on.
Because he's the one who needs like a special care. Ambassador Ordway also joined.
Good.
Good. There he is. Hi, John.
Ambassador, for you, everyone joined already.
Hi, everybody. I hope.
Not related. I was
Hello.
not. Oh, okay.
How are
Okay,
you?
I'm here.
Salam alaikum. How are you?
Salam, Ambassador. How are you? How are you,
Selam aleyküm.
Ambassador?
Okay, I think that we are all set. Just one
Hikmet
second.
Bey, nasılsınız?
Zlatko is starting.
Siz nasılsınız? Nicesiniz?
Yaxşıyıq Hikmet Bey. Biz mücadele içindeyiz.
Yani askere gitmişsin. Gitmişsin.
Onu da bekləyirik.
Yani gerekirse olur. Vatan için her şey olur.
Tabii.
Let's just one second, Zlatko, to join us, and we can start.
Yeah, here I am.
The hero.
Hello, Zlatko.
Hello, Hikmet. How are you, my friend?
Very
Hello,
much.
Zlatko. Hello.
Oh, Ivo, is that you? What up? How close and how far
Yes.
we are?
Your Excellencies, first of all, I would like to bring greetings from our co-chairs, Madam President Vaidevika Freiberg and Dr. Ismail Geldin, for your continued support and commitment and involvement with Nizami Ganjavi International Center, especially in these hard days. And this is really very hard, difficult period for the Republic of Azerbaijan, because it's a fight for the independence and because it's a fight of the territorial integrity. And when there's lots of questions, which is you are the people who can answer that. Why Iran is distributing military troops to Armenia? Why Russia is distributing military troops to Armenia? And then everyone is blaming. There is no support to Azerbaijan. What we can do and how like-minded people can be in support to Azerbaijan, President of Azerbaijan. Ambassador, thank you so much for your continued support and leadership in these hours that you are spending with us. And I am sure that you will take a good lead this group. Ambassador Shekuta.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rav Shammal. Thank you, appreciate it. This is a good chance to kind of continue some of the work which we've been doing, but I think, for the Nizami Ganjavi group, this is important to kind of look at, because this is an issue which really does have an effect on the peace and security of Europe. It's a long-standing conflict, but it's one that needs to be addressed. It's one which obviously over the past few days has become a hot conflict, kinetic activity. And so it's deeply concerning. And what I'm hoping we could do today is look, A, where we are, but B, also where we can go, what it is we can do. And I'm just thinking in terms of some of the things that have been put out recently. There are, there are sort of Americans who are asking whether it is wise to let Moscow really be taking the lead on trying to find a solution and a way forward here. What sort of impact is that going to have? And concerned about whether or not the Russians are able to really build, that they've shown a lot of activity in terms of hybrid warfare and so forth, but where's the constructive effort? The Carnegie Moscow Center published a piece the other day calling that the action to date by Washington, Moscow, Ankara, Paris, and others has resulted in a situation where there's, quote, a great deal of unused international potential. And at the same time, I'm looking at a piece out of Spiegel, which called this Der Krieg, den niemand gewinnen kann, the war that no one can win. And so this is a situation which we're looking at, situation which really has broad impacts. And so I'm glad to join and have everyone here. We're going to try to do this in lightning rounds. So 3 minutes each, and I will kind of start doing this. Sorry, but it's the only way we're going to be able to get through this. And I know that there's a lot of expertise here and a lot of thoughts. So many of you are very experienced politicians, so you know sound bites better than us diplomats. So we will look to you to sort of take the lead on this. But I would like to sort of work through the order in which Roshan Malam set out. So if we could begin first with Elnur Aliyev from the Nizami Ganjavi Center to sort of get us kicked off for 3 minutes.
Before we start, can I just, because I think everyone in the group maybe knows each other, but because I invited John Ordway to come, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that John, again, it was a career foreign service officer like Ambassador Sekuda and Ambassador Hoagland and myself. He was U.S. Ambassador to Armenia. So I thought he could bring some interesting perspectives to this discussion as well. He's been U.S. Ambassador to Kazakhstan, served in Russia, and so really has a good understanding of the region. So anyway, I wanted to introduce John to everyone who doesn't know him.
Thanks, Susan. That was good. Thank you. Elnur Malam.
Yes, Ambassador. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I would like to thank everybody for being available for a very important Zoom meeting today. In fact, we are living that very important now historical moment. We are living through the historical moment now. I think that what's happening in Azerbaijan now in the front line will define the shape of the region. It's not just for Azerbaijan, but I think that what's happening here will have much broader regional implications. And I mean regional, I don't mean necessarily South Caucasus. I also imply Central Asia. I also imply even Middle East and even Eastern Europe. And today, what's happening today, in fact, the scale of what's happening and even the boldness that Azerbaijan has taken up this issue has never been expected to the same degree that I mean it was not expected, and I think that the signals that we are receiving here as Azerbaijanis living our own history here is very strange, because instead of nobody's talking about international law, normal international reaction at best is to call for the ceasefire and the negotiations again, that we have been through it for the last almost 30 years. And unfortunately, over the last 30 years, international community hasn't shown that much activity in terms of trying to understand what is happening. And I think that it was required that Azerbaijan start retaliate properly, that the world understand that there is something going wrong. And you know, today we have I had a discussion with one of my friends, and I was wondering, the question come up to my mind that the answer to the situation lies in a hypothetical situation. We are continuing our retaliation efforts, and we're reaching the Armenian border, and we fight as a preventive measure to control some part of the Armenian territory. So I would very much wonder what will be the international reaction and how the international community will try to speak out to Azerbaijan in that case. So I would like just to mirror the situation, have the symmetrical situation, also hypothetical, but now since we are starting the full-fledged basically warfare, it is very much possible, and I'm sure that with our military force, it is feasible. But in order to understand the situation and to arrive to understand what should be the reaction, international reaction, let's look at that situation. That now we have decided that, for example, to ensure the stable transportation to Nakhchivan, we decided to control some part of Armenia. And I would like to get the feedback from international community. You know, it would be interesting to compare that feedback with the feedback that we are receiving at the moment.
Thank you very much, and you win special prizes for getting us kicked off with a 3-minute speech. So thank you so very, very much. I think Ms. Tekashvili will be joining us later, but maybe jump now to Ambassador Hoagland. who was, in addition to various roles as ambassador, was also temporary one of the co-chairs with the Minsk group. Dick?
Okay, thank you very much, Bob, and good morning, good day, good evening to everyone. Let me start by saying the year 2020 has really turned into the year from hell, hasn't it? I also want to say that I am speaking privately as a private citizen. I am representing not my government nor any other organization. The very first thing I want to say is that a ceasefire is essential. How did this come about? Armenia invaded and to this day continues to occupy another sovereign nation. This is against international law. And yet very few commentators ever comment about this. Early in the 20th century, the Soviet Union drew borders for its republics that didn't always respect ethnic populations. But after independence, a number of countries, especially in Central Asia, went to work bilaterally to re-demarcate their borders and did so successfully. Right now, the OSCE Madrid principles that could lead to a long-term lasting peace are still valid, but neither Baku nor Yerevan has come to accept them at this point. So at the moment, what's going on? Destruction and loss of human life. At this point, it's essential to have a ceasefire and then, as I hope this group will continue to do today, work on new ideas for lasting peace. That's my initial presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. We turn now to former Foreign Minister Hikmet Çetin. Hikmet, can we hear from you now?
He's on mute.
Mr. Minister, I think, Your Excellency, I think you're on mute.
Minister.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Well, hello to everybody. Well, we are not evening in this part of the world, but maybe in Azerbaijan now is almost evening. Well, as we all remember, Armenia is continuing occupier of Azeri lands and responsible for the recent violation as well, because it is against 1994 ceasefire. Occupying more than 20% of Azeri territory, Armenia has up to date resisted all approaches to a peaceful settlement. I remember from the first day as a foreign minister of Turkey, we tried with everybody, even Jimmy Baker at that time, foreign minister of U.S. Actually in Brussels during the NATO meeting. We tried everything, but it was not possible to reach any peaceful solution. Well, as has been said, Armenia is also in violation of the 4 UN Security Council resolutions: 822, 853, 874, and 884, all adopted in 1993. And in addition to that, UN General Assembly resolution adopted 62-243 in 2008 on the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. I think the issue is legacy of the divisive policy of Soviet era. Russia today exercises almost total control over Armenia, protecting its borders and providing security to the country. The issue also enables Russia to exercise substantial influence over Azerbaijan as well, as a former part of the Soviet Union. The US and France, co-chairs of the Minsk group, like Russia, are reluctant to put any pressure on Armenia because of the large Armenian diasporas in their countries. Hence, Russia is the key player and in a sense, the ultimate arbiter of any possible agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. In repelling Armenian attack, Azerbaijan acts in full compliance with international law and UN Security Council, General Assembly, and OSCE resolutions, exercising its right of self-defense in its own territories under occupation by Armenia. Because Azerbaijan, one minute, Azerbaijan decide to defend his own country. But at the end of the day, the armed conflict must be brought to an end. Ceasefire restored and the dispute be settled by diplomacy. Turkey is also a member of the Minsk group, has consistently supported the resolution of the issues in accordance with international law and the binding resolution of UN Security Council. Armenia must withdraw from Nagorno-Karabakh and the other occupied Azeri territories. If you notice, because I don't use different notation Armenia, Karabakh, I prefer to use term issue. Some refer to as dispute territory. I disagree with that. Nagorno-Karabakh is Azeri territory occupied by Armenia. The problem is Armenian occupation.
So, man, if I could ask you to hold it there, because we're going to want to try to come back. We've got 90 minutes, and so we'll serve a little bit more.
Okay.
And in a sense, that's also good because we can then react to ideas that are coming up along the way.
Okay.
Ambassador Ordway, I realize we're the American ambassador in Armenia. You are not speaking for Armenia, but we would appreciate your sense and from your experience, how your views on this situation.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. It's early out where I am in California, so I've got a full day ahead of me here. So starting things off with a bang. Yeah, I thank you very much for the notation that I was the American ambassador to Armenia, and I in no way pretend to represent or defend Armenian interests or views, but I think it would be probably useful for me to put on the table what I suspect are the Armenian views, just so those are taken into account as this group tries to figure out what the best way to proceed forward is. If we did have an Armenian here, I think you would see all kinds of jumping up and down and total disagreement with almost everything that has been said to date. And in many ways, I've been, working on, been acquainted with this issue since for almost 20 years now. And I sort of look at it as sort of two very loud deaf people talking and screaming at each other. I can tell you that in Armenia, the issue of Karabakh is seen as an essential element of national identity and existence. That, and this is shared not only by the citizens of the Republic of Armenia, but by Armenians worldwide. And in fact, I've noticed in my social media feeds from my Armenian side, resistance at this point, even to the idea of a ceasefire, because ceasefire would mean defeat. Again, this is just ordinary people talking. I'm not hearing this from officials or anything else. When I was ambassador and ever since, I've always said time is on the side of nobody in this conflict. And I was proved wrong on numerous occasions, but now I think finally it is true that time is not on anybody's side, and that this eruption of armed conflict is not like any of the previous ceasefire violations. This is not a ceasefire violation. This is part of an effort to resolve the issue, not by negotiation, but by force, So my very pessimistic Machiavellian view is this has to play out. There's been an assumption that Armenia holds military superiority in the defensive sense in Karabakh, controlling the heights, very, very well dug in, well supplied. Well, now we're going to see that thesis put to the test, and I personally do not know what the answer is. I think that this conflict will have to either come to a natural equilibrium where both sides feel they're not losing or gaining anything more by the conflict, at which point there'll be an opportunity to try to negotiate a ceasefire of some sort of. But at the moment, I wouldn't see any prospects of actually regaining that ceasefire unless it was a restoration of the status quo before this latest outbreak. At least from the Armenian side, I see no signs of any willingness in Armenia to walk away from Karabakh. And I see no signs, and it's been reinforced by what I've heard so far today, that Azerbaijan is willing to do anything other than to accept the full return of Karabakh. So I think diplomacy has been tried for 30 years here, and the soldiers are getting their turn, and the diplomats are just going to have to wait and see what the soldiers produce before they can go in and try to set some order to it. Also, I would just find that I think Russia's in a very difficult position here. I think they do not know what to do. They want to be, at this point, friends to all and enemies to none in this part of the world, and it's going to be a very hard position for them to maintain. And they have significantly less influence over Armenia than has been asserted today. So that's it.
Thank you. It's sort of, it was useful to sort of hear that those different views. Now we switch gears a little bit, and people who have deep experience in other long, difficult ethnic conflicts and your sense of what's going on and possible ways forward. If I could start here with President Ivanic from Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Is it okay? Can you hear me? Yes, okay. It's good to see all of you, dear friends, but the subject of our discussion today is not very good and very pleasant. We are faced with a serious conflict and without a very clear vision, what is the solution? And I am not the real expert for the region, but my perception is that if there was no serious attempt, especially by the big powers, to solve the situation there, that the local players are slowly becoming tired of that situation because they, after 27 or almost 30 years, they don't see any step forward. And because of that, in that situation, conflict or even a war is a logical outcome. So the question is how to overcome the whole serious problem. And there are a few messages which have to be learned from the, let's say, Bosnian case. First, the role of law, of international law. You have a lot of conflicts around the world where you have small regions who would like to be either independent or autonomous within the sovereign states. And I personally believe there must be everywhere the same approach. The sovereignty of the state, especially if that is something which is approved by the big players, has to be the most significant. On the other hand, typically it's always a conflict with the minorities. On the other hand, minorities have to feel safe enough. In order to achieve that, there are a few preconditions. One precondition is agreement among the big players. The big players have to have at least agreed approach. As long as the big players, the big powers, have favorites on the ground, there is no way to have a solution. Because side which is supported by one or another big player will continue with the war, expecting that they can win completely. And because of that, I really believe it's significant that we have, at least formally speaking, agreed statement by President Trump, President Putin, President Macron. I hope that they will not forget once there will be a ceasefire, that they will not forget for the next 27 years situation in Azerbaijan. They have to continue then with the same efforts. Another precondition for the solution has to be readiness of the local players to agree, to find the solution. This is also maybe even more important and significant. At the end of the day, at least based on the experience in Bosnia, we have to sit and to find solution on the table. There is no way except the solution, a peaceful solution, agreements to solve in long term any conflict around the world. Because if one side is not happy with the solution, this side which is not happy will wait for the second half of the game. That second half of the game can start in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, but it will start again. So because of that, agreement among the big players, readiness from all sides to accept the solution of local sides, let's say so, and then the principle of interoperability of states is significant and important, and it can be changed only if the sides agree. And because of that, some examples around the world, where some of the parts, some of the countries,
to maybe just hold it there.
That is not very good.
You've given us a good basis there with the idea of the agreed approach among the major players, the readiness of local players to be part of this, and then also sort of how we deal with changes. If I could jump now to Ambassador Elliott for her thoughts and also looking from her experience in dealing with other conflicts, this situation and possible ways forward.
Well, thanks, Ambassador Sakuda, and thanks to all of you for participating. I just want to give you a little background. You know, before these the events of this summer, not only the events that we're experiencing now, but then also, you know, the conflict that we saw along the border earlier in the summer, Ambassador Sakuda and I had been talking about looking for ways that we could help to, in some non-government way, you know, to bring both sides of this conflict together to try to, even if we couldn't resolve Nagorno-Karabakh, but maybe keep the, have a ceasefire, as Ambassador Hogan has said, but, you know, keep the military conflict down. So my question to all of you was going to be, and I appreciate what Ambassador Ordway said, is why now? And I think this is interesting what he said is why now, after so many years of just keeping the status quo, why now has Armenia decided to engage in this conflict? And it could just be, as President Mladen has said, people are tired and they want to see some kind of resolution. So what I'd like to see, the organization, you know, I'm a former diplomat, but the organization that I work for now, we do track 2 discussions. And this is what Ambassador Sakuda and I talked about. We also have a relationship with Nizami Ganjavi. So we don't see, I'm not saying that we're pro-Armenia or pro-Azerbaijan, but we're an organization who likes to be an honest broker and bring people together to look for ways that we could influence U.S. government in particular, but others in trying to come up with a solution. And I also do agree with 2 of the things that President Mladen said, is that the people have to be, you can't resolve a conflict without having the people come to some kind of agreement. And I think in this case, the big powers also need to be involved, and perhaps are playing roles behind the scenes that, you know, we as this group are not aware of. So my main goal here today is to get your points of view and see if there is any way that we could, you know, begin dialogue. Not track one, I would say I'm looking at track two, track 1.5, because we to try to make recommendations, and especially for me, to my own government, about how we could play a role in trying to bring a ceasefire, as Ambassador Hoagland said, and then, you know, do something to try to move forward to, you know, to finding a resolution to this conflict. And I think you've all eloquently pointed out the UN resolutions, the Madrid principles, and things that haven't been followed. So obviously diplomacy hasn't been working. And is there a different way we can go now to try to help the people of Azerbaijan and Armenia resolve the conflict? So that's all I have right now.
Thank you. That's helpful. Again, sort of this idea of where we are, but also where we can maybe try to help things go. Turn now to President Josipovic, former president of Croatia. Again, from your experience and thoughts. Mr. President, I think you're still muted.
You know, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay. So this situation remind me on our situation after the war from 91 to 95. But in present situation, legal everything is clear. There is UN resolutions, not one telling what is the legal status of the relation between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's completely clear. So it's now a question whether international community is ready to enforce what was already decided or not, or international law that's applicable to this situation is just only fake international law, and it should not be the case. So I can understand we had similar situation, 2 sides, even 3 sides we had in so-called Yugoslav wars, and everyone believed that he or that his state is right. Everyone believes we are right, it's a matter of national identity, our national interest, we would like to do this and that, and the other or third side wanted completely opposite. And what happened? Unfortunately, at the very end of the war, it was relatively clear how it's going to finish if something is not agreed. And what I consider as the biggest success of Croatia in the war, not military winning, no, we had very successful military action, Oluja at the very end of the war, but that was not the biggest issue. The biggest win of Croatia, not only Croatia, was agreement of peaceful reintegration. And I think it's very good and very unique action by United Nations to find agreement how to incorporate Croatian occupied territory to Croatian state, and how to treat Serbian minority and to make them feeling that they have future in Croatia as a country. So I think that in future, it will be very wise not to think that the war is the only issue. It's not. But firstly, the parties should be convinced by big powers, by the UN, that they are willing to intervene to apply already mentioned international law. So finally, if both sides want to have peace, and I think that they are willing to have peace finally, and if they are aware that international law should be applied, this example for Croatia is a very good one. So in that case, if we applied this Croatian case to Nagorno-Karabakh, that means let's apply international law. Let's Nagorno-Karabakh be again part of Azerbaijan. It's very important. But let's see what will be the modus to convince Armenian people living in Azerbaijan that they are not outlaws after that. They have special treatment, they have good position, they have appropriate kind of autonomy, and probably that is the only solution I can see today as proper one, not continuing bloodshed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And for turn now to President Zaltlis, former president of Latvia. You too, Latvia too has an experience in trying to deal with Russian minorities.
Good evening, everybody, and good morning, everybody. You know, I hope we will have a very exciting discussion. At first, I would like to point out what is different in this war from the previous incidents which happened during the last 30 years. It's a real war. It's not just an incident, a minor incident on the front line between the Armenian and Azerbaijani forces. Artillery, tanks, and missiles, and helicopters, and everything is used. So it's a real, we have to call it a war, not just an incident, or let's say, burn up of the frozen conflict. And the war is going on not only on the Karabakh region, it's going on along the whole border with Armenia and Azerbaijan. The second point is the rhetoric from the Armenian side has become more aggressive. We can understand that Azerbaijanis are tired from many years and decades of failures of diplomatic attempts by Minsk group. But now we hear Armenians talking publicly about war, this annexation of new territories, about the settlements, Armenian illegal settlements in occupied territories. The rhetorics are becoming stronger and more, let's say, desperate for the solution of peace. The third point is Russia. Russia reacted very slowly on this conflict. The previous time it was few days and Russia had some leverage on both sides and the ceasefire was achieved. Today, we don't see that. Before Macron and Trump started to do something and started to talk to Putin, the reaction by Lavrov was very, very minor one. So that's about the situation. Of course, if we all say we need ceasefire as soon as possible, at present it's impossible because both sides are declaring that they are going to win, not to get a ceasefire with diplomatic solutions. So I think the main message is to the Minsk group that their diplomatic attempts during the last decades was a failure. And maybe this war will wake up and restart some kind of diplomacy. But we have to also understand that ethnic cleansing has already happened in occupied territories. There are not anymore, you know, Azerbaijanis living there. We have refugees in Azerbaijan, but very few Azerbaijanis living in these occupied territories. So what to do with that? So international community needs a proposal. What's going on after the ceasefire and what are the international guarantees? If we don't offer international guarantees for both sides, the failure and the war is going on for a long, long time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Zaltlis. That was very sobering. Turn now to former Prime Minister Legam Zidja. I'm sorry I did not get your name right, but.
Ambassador, thank you very much. I mean, every day you're improving in every sense of that word because you are pronouncing my name much better than it was last time. So, I mean, we are really getting closer. And I mean, one day I would be surprised how come I don't pronounce it as well as you do. So I think that there is a great understanding among all of us about some key points. And I think it is good to underline it. The ceasefire, I mean, from Ambassador Hoagland, who was one of the first speakers, I mean, later on to Hikmet and Susan, everyone reiterated that the first precondition for everything is to have ceasefire, to do everything that we have ceasefire on the ground, and no one has any reasons publicly to complain about it, at least. Later on, what to do after ceasefire, there are a lot of different opinions, but everyone understands that without ceasefire, there is no any way to have a real discussion on political level of what are the next steps. So first point is ceasefire, and we have to see what can be done in that respect, and that's probably precondition for everything else. The second thing that I see that there is agreement on all sides. I saw maybe what Ambassador Ordway was talking about, some kind of perception and feeling of the people in those areas. They're always different, and everything, when you have a lot of us understand that there is a lot of political, psychological fears, prejudices, perceptions of the same situation, and especially when it is painted and when you have outside support for the local conflicting parties, then even people who are on the ground they're getting stronger with their perceptions and their feelings, and they get encouraged to continue, basically speaking, to continue in a conflict. So I think it is very important that we all understand and hear that this is, as most of us bluntly and very clearly said, this is the question of respecting of or disrespecting of international law. Hikmet listed us with resolutions of UN and even General Assembly. That General Assembly resolution was a very interesting one, because there was a resolution that passed like 39 to 7 or something like it, with more than 100 abstained. And it was interesting that Minsk group countries were abstained in that resolution. But today, that General Assembly resolution, you had the countries like, for example, Turkey and Serbia, who were in favor of the resolution. And today you don't see in Serbia so clear position like it was at that time. What I'm trying to say, that the things are changing. So you cannot change by neglecting previous decisions because the political things changed. You cannot say, we all know that those 4 resolutions today in Security Council would not be able to be passed in the way they were passed in '93. We all know that. But I mean, you cannot say today, I don't care about it because this is different circumstances. Then you have to pass, and through Security Council resolutions, they will make revision of those resolutions if you are respecting. So when we are talking about international law, this is not only about Azerbaijan and Armenia. This is about the credibility and the future of multilateralism in United Nations, because United Nations are on test in here. And finally, the Minsk Group is on test, because Minsk Group is formed in order to sort out that issue. And I think that we should see how Minsk Group would be, let's say, rejuvenated in this sense. What can be done to push them in direction to take, because we all know that without great players, great powers, it is not so reasonable to expect to have political solution on the ground. Having in mind that besides France, Russia, and United States as the co-chairs or chairs of the Minsk Group, we have players who are on the ground, very clear players. Someone mentioned, we all today see Russia and Turkey, so to speak, competing on the ground. But someone mentioned Iran is the player in here, also a very strong player on the ground. So my point is very simple. We have to go back to the issue of respecting international law and international law-based decisions, primarily Security Council. I just want to remind you that the Council of Europe had a resolution on the same issue 2 times. 2 times, even resolution. Some parliaments of European Union have resolutions on Nagorno-Karabakh, which were very clear in support of UN Security Council resolutions. So if we go back, ceasefire number 1, start with all accepting us that we have to go through. And the final point is, I think we have as NGIC board, there is some discussion among us with the co-chairs. We initiated one letter as Nizami Ganjavi members, and some statement about this position, it would be good that we see how we can extend and continue with it. And especially, I think that what we are planning to do, it would be good to have most of you, not only us as members of an NGIFC board, but we are planning to convene one video conference with President Aliyev, in which he would give us some more thoughts and see how he sees personally the situation on the ground, what are the next steps as well. And I think it would be good if we can pass some messages for that video discussion from this gathering as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Fariz, I'm going to ask you to speak next. And also for everyone, just in terms of trying to sort of have a dialogue going among the members here. I'm trying to monitor chat function. I don't always get it right, but we kind of go back to school and just raise our hands, sort of recognize that way. And I know, Minister Chachin, you're up there early because I cut you off. And I know, Dick, you want to talk too. So let me go first to Fariz, and then I will start with the Minister, Dick, and I think Alnur, you're coming up too. So keep signaling me, and I'm a good New Yorker, so if I miss you, you know how, a lot of you have been in New York, you know how to deal with this, yell. Thanks a lot. Not like our own debates, but politely. Thanks. Fariz Malam.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It's a great honor for me to be here. Thank you, Nizami Ganjavi Center, for inviting me. Among such distinguished leaders, I am just a young student. But speaking from the perspective of ADA University, we have noticed a lot of indicators which were showing that negotiation process is going in a wrong direction, that things are escalating. And this mostly happened after Pashinyan came to power, you know, him saying that we will start new war for new territories, that Karabakh is Armenia, and then trying to change the format of the Minsk group, trying to add some new elements into the Minsk group. This has led to July attacks, and then consequently also now September attacks. I think Azerbaijani society is quite frustrated with the peace process because 26 years, no results, and no liberation of the occupied territories, and more than 1 million refugees are waiting to go home. What can be done? I think that here some ambassadors are asking what can be done. I think that the peace process has to be a bit detailed. So far, peace process has not provided any concrete economic, security, and social incentives to both sides. And I really liked what our Croatian colleague said, that there has to be security guarantees to minorities, but they also have to be some general security and military and economic arrangements for both sides. So I think that hopefully ceasefire will be signed. And then after that, the new international effort should focus on a very detailed arrangements regarding the peace plan, which would sort of describe what will be their life looking after the peace agreement is signed for Armenian minority and for Azerbaijanis, what will be the security arrangements, what will be the economic incentives. I think here we can also add some international institutions like World Bank and IMF providing assistance. So there has to be a very detailed security arrangement because the previous peace process has really had hit the dead end. And it didn't provide any details to both societies. So I'll stop here because I don't want to take much of your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Fariz. That was very good. And I think also this notion of getting at the other aspects, the development aspects, the social aspects, the economic, is something which I know has sort of been put to the side in some of the discussions. Minister Chachin, I cut you off earlier, so please, I'll give you another 3 minutes. And I would ask, again, dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me make clear. Turkey is at the side of Azerbaijan and will be at the side of Azerbaijan, not only because of deep historical, cultural, and social ties, because Azerbaijan is right because his territory is under occupation. And for that reason, we will continue to support. And at the same time, I think Turkey will do its best to have peaceful settlement. But I think we have to make it clear. Armenia is not occupying only Nagorno-Karabakh, because Turkey was the first country in the world that we recognized the Armenia in 1992, before the dissolving of the Soviet Union, 16th of December 1991. This official solution, the Soviet decision to have to be Russia and dissolve the Russian Federation, Soviet Union, that was 21st of December 1991. That means 4 days before we have recognized Azerbaijan, Armenia with other countries. And at the beginning, we knew that the sooner is the better, because it will be a conflict, the frozen conflict in the future. We did our best, as I was a foreign minister, every time with Azerbaijan to resolve this problem and to have diplomatic relation, both Armenia, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan, Armenia. That will bring the real peace and security in the South Caucasus. But it did not happen because it was hardliner in Armenia. For example, I think the foreign minister at that time came from the United States, Hovhannisyan. It was very much hardliner and was not possible to do anything with that. Now the situation is, of course, ceasefire, but I think for ceasefire, as far as I can see and understand, Armenia is at least should withdraw with some district of Azerbaijan. They occupied 7 rayons of Azerbaijan. 2 of them link Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia, Lachin and Kelbecher. But the next 5, I think Armenia, for ceasefire or for peaceful settlement, should leave that 5 rayon first, and then have a ceasefire, and then discuss the final solution for Nagorno-Karabakh. I think that will be the practical solution, because I think it will be very, very difficult at this time. Now we have real war there, because this is not kind of the conflict or any kind of small thing that happened in the border of Azerbaijan and Armenia. For that reason, of course, Azerbaijan now trying to get his own territory. And for practical solution, I will repeat again, Armenia has to leave some region or some rayon of Azerbaijan before to go to ceasefire. This will be the solution. I think otherwise, I think, as far as I can see, it is very, very difficult after this point to tell to Azerbaijan to come to ceasefire without any I think to convince Azerbaijan that by the big countries, mainly Russia, US, and France, as the 3 co-chairs, that they will do their best to comply with international law. Unless to do that, as far as I can see, it's very, very difficult at this point to say Azerbaijan, say, okay, just stop and don't do anything. How they are going to explain to their people in Azerbaijan, because they have lost so many people and both sides as the victim of the war. And for that, I think international community, mainly the 3 big countries, the co-chairs of Minsk group, should play more active role, mainly Russia. Without Russia, it's very, very difficult to have settlement in the South Caucasus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I'll turn this over now to Dick Hoagland and then to Elnur Malim. And I'm also going to warn Flacco, and I want to warn John that I'm going to ask him to come in. Again, I know you can't speak for Armenia, but you may have a good sense of where we are in sort of how any of this will be perceived on the by Armenia. Thanks. Dick?
Thank you, Bob. I want to add 3 very fast points to make sure they're part of our discussion. First, I have heard repeatedly and I have read repeatedly that the OSCE Minsk Group process has failed. There is a reason the Minsk Group process has failed to this point, and that's because the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh is existential for the leaders of both nations, Azerbaijan and Armenia. Should one leader or another begin to say it's time to find a compromise solution, that leader would be very likely deposed. That's essential to remember. Second, is about international public opinion. I'm sure that everyone's aware of this, but the Armenian diaspora is already extremely active internationally. And in fact, right now in the United States, there is a resolution before our Congress that was instigated by the Armenian diaspora, calling for condemnation of Azerbaijan. The third point I want to throw out to make sure that even if you don't agree, in my opinion, I am not absolutely convinced that Russia is so neutral and innocent at this moment. I know that's a different issue to discuss, but let me make it clear that every nation in the world, including my own, has a public policy, but there is also covert activity that goes on that sometimes really contradicts public policy. Those are the points I wanted to throw out. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Elnur Rollin.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that having heard all the comments, let's just put these things in order. First of all, what was happening last 27 years, I mean, status quo, definitely was in favor of the Republic of Armenia because it was occupying and controlling the territories and trying to convince everybody in terms of international community, convince them. So the status quo was in favor of the Republic of Armenia. So now if we talk about ceasefire, so, you know, my impression that this is type of deja vu, because when we broke a ceasefire back in 1994, all what you have just what has been mentioned today was in place. There was international guarantee, and there was a agreement among big players in one, which is the UN Security Council resolutions, right? So big players come together. They have come together, come up with the UN Security Council resolutions. So at that time, it was, I think, still the ultimate binding resolution that can be adopted by the UN in terms of the security and the peace. So at this moment, can international community offer something more stronger than this? They're trying to call for ceasefire. This is a very important issue. How you can now, I mean, after 27 years, if somebody is calling Azerbaijan, for example, for ceasefire, so what can be put on the table to convince? This is the point. Because all the things that have been happening over the last 27 years basically convinced Azerbaijan that the only way to change the situation is to play realpolitik, not to play idealism, which Azerbaijan has trying to at least to believe over the last 27 years, because all these chances has been given. Azerbaijan was ready to grant ultimate status of autonomy to Armenian population in Karabakh, and it was open discussion. Azerbaijan was even promising the investments in terms of economic development. So all of this has been happening over the last 27 years. There's nothing that we have mentioned today that hasn't been offered from Azerbaijan over the last, they say, during this peace process. But this peace process came to the deadlock. And this is, I think, a core issue that Azerbaijanis, they realized that these things will not move. Very simple. And I think that before talking about ceasefire to Azerbaijan, if international community is approaching this issue from that side, there should be very specific understanding what differently can be offered and how it can be convincing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, President Recognize. Mr. Prime Minister, if I could turn over to you.
Let me mute. Thank you very much. I just want to shortly make a point that
a few hours ago, I don't know how familiar with, but a few hours ago, we had a joint statement of President of Russia, France, and US who have called for immediate end to the escalation of violence in Nagorno-Karabakh, and leaders chair the OSCE group, Minsk group, tasked with ending Azerbaijan and Armenia conflict. It's very interesting, Azerbaijani and Armenia conflict. So it's no more a conflict between Nagorno-Karabakh, and which is, so to speak, a right way to put it, because basically speaking, this is Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict on the territory of Azerbaijan according to international law. But I just quote that he read the joint statement from President Vladimir Putin, Emmanuel Macron, and Donald Trump. The statement says, we call for immediate cessation of hostilities between the relevant military forces, number one. And number two, in a co-chair's statement by on behalf of Vladimir Putin, President Macron, and Donald Trump, says that we call also on the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan to commit without delay to resuming substantive negotiations in a good faith and without preconditions. Now I'll stop it here. What I think it is important now, if we have, of course, today, earlier in the morning, we had President Erdogan, who was basically speaking, probably knowing that something like this will come. He was very reluctant. He had a statement which was not so friendly to Minsk group activities. So we are entering into a time in which if the Putin, Macron, and Trump, a few hours ago, issued a statement and calling for stopping the conflict, basically speaking, military activities, but at the same time calling for resuming substantive negotiations in good faith. I think it is important now that we set the stage for what does that mean, and I think setting the stage for next stage, which is basically speaking that should not be negotiations from the green field. This is negotiations from the current international law and order perspective. We have resolutions, current resolutions, Security Council, which are very clear, and I don't want to repeat anything about it. So any further negotiations should be set in a framework of existing Security Council decisions, with, of course, the things that President Josipovic was mentioning and President Ivanic to a certain extent about how those negotiations should be having in mind the security guarantees for everyone in the future in a sovereign country, which is called Republic of Azerbaijan. And if saying said so, go back to the Dayton, how the Dayton was set up, we had, basically speaking, there was not negotiation between warring fractions on ground, in between legitimate presidents and representatives of Bosnia and Herzegovina and outlaws at that moment, but negotiations with the neighboring countries' presidents and representation of the country of state of Bosnia and Herzegovina delegation, who was not controlling overall territory at that moment. So I think it is very important to say, well, the framework, if we will have someone following the call of Putin, Macron, and Trump, ceasefire negotiations, we better very quickly get the position, clear position on what that negotiation should be framed in. And I think that's very important at this very moment.
Thank you. John, if I could unfairly turn it over to you for some thoughts.
Yeah, all right. First of all, obviously I can't argue against international law and Security Council resolutions, but I can say that depending on how you frame them, from the Armenian point of view, if you frame it in that way, it's going to be an invitation for them to come to the surrender conference. And that's the way they see it. Now, we do have an example of what appeared to be for a while a very successful resolution of this issue, and that was the Key West negotiations in 2001. And my takeaway from that was when President Aliyev, Haydar Aliyev, went home, he discovered that that resolution was politically unsustainable even for him in Azerbaijan. So we can't turn the clock back. We can't go to 2001. We can't change the political situation in Azerbaijan. But essentially what I think would have to happen, one other point before I get to that, and that is that the word autonomy in many parts of the former Soviet Union has a very sort of bad sense to it. it's seen as a way of Moscow of keeping control of someplace. It's not really autonomy. It's a method to ensure control despite the wishes of the local inhabitants. And that's, I think, the first thing that Armenians feel when they hear the word autonomy is they think of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, which they felt was not protecting the interest of the ethnic Armenian population that lived there. So there's a lot of complications. Just getting people in the room and saying, okay, let's have a negotiation and reach a solution based on this principle of international law, that doesn't get you anywhere. Also the issue, it's very interesting, the issue that was said, maybe Armenia as a price for a ceasefire could return the 5 rayons. Up to this point, no one in Armenia, as far as I know, has ever claimed that in the long run they have any interest in maintaining those 5 rayons. That's always been part of the idea of the return of those rayons has always been seen on the Armenian side as sort of some part of an ultimate solution. So I think, and the other issue is what's the military utility? It's the ceasefire lines were essentially drawn because the Armenian military felt that was the most defensible, best place they could end up the war. I hate to be pessimistic, but as I said in the beginning, I think that the only chance for a quick ceasefire would be a ceasefire more or less on the basis of the ceasefire lines that have been existing for the last 30 years. Anything more than that, I think there's going to have to be strong pressure on the ground that would force one of the other sides to change those sides. So again, I don't want to be, the guy out there in the crowd, sort of saying, police go home. I'm against law and order. I'm not. I'm just saying this is what I think is a realistic basis for engaging the Armenians. And if you go back and if you look at the history of Key West, you see there are elements that were in play there and that could be put back in play. But at the end of the day, every Armenian I ever spoke to was only willing to accept the final settlement that ensured in a objective fashion, beyond declarations of Baku, in the welfare and self-determination, ability to control their own lives of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. That's what they see as their essential, absolute bottom line, along with some physical way of transportation and contact to and fro. So.
Thank you very much. If I could turn it over now to President Satlas.
Thank you. So we should not underestimate the Russian influence in this conflict. I tried to answer the question why Armenians have become so aggressive. Who encourages them to do that? Who encouraged them to attack the borderline, which is outside the occupied territories, Tovos area? So, and the logical conclusions are very clear, Russians have military base in Armenia. Russians don't have any military base in Azerbaijan. So that might be that the Russians provide Armenians with the military intelligence information. It might be so. And they provide the weapons on both sides at the same time being on Armenian side. And they are totally reluctant for sustainable, long-lasting solution. So I think they are playing behind the scenes. And I'll emphasize again that the behavior and the reaction was so hesitant this time that they have much more plans. Maybe much more we can't even imagine and in our fantasies which plans the Putin has in Caucasus. So the question is how to get back on the track, the Minsk group. And then if Macron and Trump acts on one platform and diplomatically forces or personally forces Putin to come to some solution, then it might work. But I'll say it again, the ceasefire is the easiest thing we have to say because it's natural. We don't want people to lose their lives. But very important for creating this ceasefire is to agree which line. There was the opinion that we have to return to the line before this war, I don't think anybody will going to return to that. So it might be that that line, which is reality confrontation line today, or let's say the day of the ceasefire. And let's remember the Russians in Donbass, after again Minsk agreements, they said that they need 2 weeks to implement the ceasefire just to occupy Debeltsevo. So we just have to understand that Russians think differently. It's a different diplomacy, and it's different goals, and the goals are hidden. The goals are hidden. And you see, I can't imagine that a strong, powerful country, which is a good friend of Armenia and a good friend of Azerbaijan, can stop the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. So the West should really think over what is the best way to deal with the Minsk, how to restart the Minsk group, how to decide. And the role of the United States and the role of France is a high one. And maybe, you know, there was a, let's say, opposition for bringing in the European Union. Maybe it's an idea, but the European Union is more, let's say, multilateral institution, and they don't make decisions in one day. So we need at least 100 hours of talking to each other to understand what's the best way, what to propose.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I think, yeah, that's good. Mr. Ivanovic.
I have one question to Richard and John. Maybe they are a little bit more familiar than the rest of us. Was there any concrete proposal in the Minsk group about the solution? Or was it just discussion without any concrete proposal in the past? Because my feeling is that solution at the end of the day will have two, let's say, elements. One element, definitely there will be sovereignty of the Azerbaijan over the territory, but I'm quite convinced that there will be some sort of the very strong autonomy of the Armenian people within the Nagorno-Karabakh. So my question is, was that discussed within the Minsk group at all?
Before, Dick, let me go with the pre-part, and then I'll let you get to the more recent part. But I can speak a little bit for the time that I was in Armenia, which was after Key West, and I can say that there was extensive discussion. There were lots of discussions about Kelbajar and what to do about it, about a connection between mainland Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. There were talks about how you would assure some sort of access or guarantee Nakhichevan. There were talks about where you would draw lines. So yes, there were endless talks about what form of autonomy. Would it be a long period of time? Would you have some sort of election? If you had an election, would the people from Susha be allowed to vote from the places of exile? Would they have to return to Susha? So there was extensive, detailed discussion. There was also a very long discussion about what kind of international peacekeeping force there might be deployed, how long it would be deployed, what its tasks and what its mandate would be. So it went on and on and on, not just about maintaining ceasefire and status quo, but about what you would do. But again, that's like 15 years ago. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to Dick, who can give you more of what's happened in more recent years.
Thank you very much. I will only answer the question, does the Minsk group have a concrete proposal? Absolutely. It's called the Madrid Principles. It lays out withdrawal of Armenia from the surrounding territories. It calls for an absolute ceasefire and an eventual, without a timeline, an eventual referendum by the people of Nagorno-Karabakh on their future, but it's without a timeline. That is very, very close to something else that has been proposed, and this was in 2017, which is actually called the Lavrov Plan, because it was Sergei Lavrov himself who submitted it. And it's very, very, very much like the Madrid Principles. Was Russia moving towards a serious resolution at that time. I have a little bit of privileged information I can't openly share at this moment, but I can tell you that Russia was playing a double game at that time and almost patting the foreign minister on the shoulder and say, okay, do your thing. But they were not fully behind it. That's all I want to throw in at the moment, but I'd be glad to answer other questions.
Yeah, if I could actually also jump in on substantively in terms of some of the things that have been said. I remember in 2016, there were changes in positions between Azerbaijan and Armenia along the line of contact. And one of the things that came up in discussion in the OSCE, it wasn't put terrifically well diplomatically, and I think it's something she sort of raised some red flags initially, but was that the Azerbaijanis said, side said, no, we are not going to go back to where we were before the 4-day war. This is our territory to begin with, and we shouldn't, there's no reason why we would pull back from positions which we, the Azerbaijani side, won. I suspect that same thing is going to hold true in this conflict, in this round of fighting. And I also would suspect that the Armenian side would say exactly the same thing. So that sort of puts this, this question of how to move forward. I think, that the line that John had about, a conference which is seen as a, invitation to a conference on surrendering, it would be a problem for both sides. And so how you actually couch this is going to really be important. We're coming close to the end, but Elnur.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like just to, in line with what President Zaflets was saying, we are now what the discussion is as if we're trying to appease a occupying force. But if you look in deep in what's happening in the region, definitely this is highly correlated with the Russian interests, because all the insistence and the boldness that Armenia has today is simply due to the support by Russia, and even weaponry-wise, Armenia cannot afford this weaponry. It is a small state, very poor state. So the only way they're still fighting us back in our own territories because they're supplied free of charge. And the question is, why you are supplying that amount of the weaponry free of charge? Now, but there is no free of charge. There is no free lunch. But this is the answer to the question. And the only reason that Armenia is still exists as a republic, I would say, is because they're supported. Because it is not even a sustainable state as an economy. But now, look, this country is waging a war and fighting oil and gas country. And there was official reports of the weaponry transportation by airlifted from Russia, bypassing Azerbaijan, crossing Caspian Sea. I think somebody shared this to Armenia, and that even today it's transiting Iran through Caspian Sea, transiting Iran. So why US, and it's all free of charge officially. And all the weaponry that was supplied to Armenia was free of charge. So is Russia so much gracious and believes in the humanity? That's why they are supplying free of charge weaponry? I think, if you look at, again, the only reason Armenia can speak up to us is because they're supported. That's it. And there is no other solution. And you can play it directly, you can play it behind the scene, but this is the reality, unfortunately. And again, what is happening today, this is what I said at the beginning, because if Azerbaijan can regain its independence, and I think this is the question here. Now, the battle is not about the territories. It's not about Karabakh. It's about independence of Azerbaijan. That's it. This is the only question here. And if Azerbaijan regains full independence and the freedom, it will send completely different signals to the whole region. This is what I was saying in the beginning. And this is, I think, all games about this. And Georgia will be different. And many other countries will be different. So this is the core of the issue. Armenia, I think, seriously, with all due respect to Ambassador Ordway, Armenia is there just because it is a project. It started as a project. I don't want to go to the history. It's very clear. Go to Russian archives, read what was there prior to the Republic of Armenia and how Armenians were settled there, how Armenians were settled in Karabakh, how Azerbaijanis were resettled from Armenia to Azerbaijan proper. If you talk self-determination, brothers, 200,000 of Azerbaijanis were just moved on the eve of this last conflict from Armenia to Azerbaijan, 200,000. And the 200,000 Azerbaijanis at that time, it was 10% of Armenia. So why they didn't claim for self-determination? So please, I mean, if you go deep and sincere discussion, this is the only issue. Independence of Azerbaijan. I think that the international community, sometimes I feel pity for, I mean, those which are promoting the democracy with liberal ideas and supporting Armenia. And this is two contradictory things. If Armenia wanted to be independent, this is my sincere belief, there would have been no conflict. Because the only way Armenia can sustain occupation is through dependence. This is the only way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On my
one point.
Oh, please, Mr. Minister, jump in.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to be very, very practical because unless we give the international guarantee to Azerbaijan that the peace discussion or peace process will be on the basis of international law, we should not leave Azerbaijan with only one alternative. The one alternative, which is very bad, but unfortunately, we shouldn't, the international community shouldn't do that, to reach territorial integrity by force. And that international community should not leave Azerbaijan with that solution, because there are too many international law and resolutions. If you do not comply with this, then we are telling to Azerbaijan, just up to you to use force and to get territorial integrity. That will not be good for anybody, for the region as well. But I think we have to be very practical that Azerbaijan will not withdraw with their own territory unless to get this guarantee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think as I'm looking at the clock is running against us, President Yosipovich, and I think Fariz, you wanted to talk, and I think that may be exhausting our list. President Yosipovich?
Mr. President?
You're muted.
Mr. President?
President Yosipovich, I think you're muted.
Okay, it's good. Thank you. So I wanted to say that this thesis that a referendum about self-determination should take place is a very dangerous one for different reasons. One reason is that during the war or occupation, many residents were expelled from the territory. So it's not possible to have fair referendum having on referendum just one part of the population. And secondly, even if proportion of populations are not changed, it will be very, very dangerous to organize self-determination referendum in frames of sovereign state. Then shall we organize it in Spain? Shall we organize it in Croatia? Shall we organize it in Russia as well? So I think that international law is not giving such support to a referendum without clear criteria, and I think in this case those criteria are not meant. So I think it should be clear for anyone in this conflict now that the final solution is the only one. Solution established by international law, by resolutions of UN, and then in frames of this resolution there should be discussion how to ensure that Armenian people living in Nagorno-Karabakh have their autonomy, have their rights, participation in the government, cultural issues, economical issues, and it's the only way. The only alternative to this is war.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fariz?
Yeah, just a quick line to say that this conflict in September is very different from previous military clashes. I think this time Azerbaijan is very seriously determined to retake its surrounding territories. And I think if 1, 2, 3 regions get liberated, it will change the dynamics on the negotiation table as well. I think there will be a new balance of power. and I think there will be new incentive to restart discussions. If no major changes happen on the battlegrounds, then we will be back to the previous format of negotiations. It will be again a stalemate, and I think that much depends on what will happen out of the battlefields. I think Azerbaijan is seriously determined to, this time, for the first time actually in decade or so, to change the situation on the ground. We'll see what will happen. I think that this might be the beginning of a new process, maybe more effective, more efficient, more results oriented, more substantial, because the previous process has really hit the dead end. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may just start tying us up here, and then I want Roshan maybe to sort of talk a little bit. Susan, if you have any final thoughts as well. It's been an interesting discussion, and I think, you know, again, the limitations of what it is that might be possible. Zlatko, I just saw you up there too.
Very, very quickly, I want to underline, I know he will be surprised when I say this, but my dear Ivo Josipovic, my dear friend and neighbor and colleague and real friend, we are coming from the same region. We agree about values, about basic principles. Sometimes we disagree about how we should proceed along certain lines when it comes to our own region. But I have to say clearly, what he said in his short statement is absolutely, is something which I absolutely support, and I think it is very, very important. Number one, we have to prevent any referendums on any part of any territory, regardless how big or small it is, because it goes in completely wrong direction billions of the way, and especially in this case. And second thing, go back to square one, which is international law respect. I don't want to say like Hikmet, I'm on the side of Azerbaijan, I'm on the side of this one, but I'm on this case, I'm on the side of respecting of international law, and going from that perspective, take that as a non-negotiable, and then proceed. And then I think we have some kind of chance to get. So Ivo, you were good.
Thank you. Thank you. I think at one point, I think sort of trying to tie this a little bit together, again, it's, there's a lot of history that's already happened over the last 30 years. And I think the question of being able to kind of reset a clock to 1994 is probably impossible. There have been projects that have been put on the table. The question is willingness. And I think the point that both Dick and John made, and I think is a true, sort of my own experience in Azerbaijan, this issue is one which, what do you want to call it, existential? It's core. It's almost the way the countries are defining their national identities, and we need to recognize that. And that's something that Susan and I have talked about, how you try to deal with this, because it's, in a way, you can say the government's created this situation, but the governments are now prisoners of this situation, and that affects things. The other point which we've talked about really to a certain extent with Turkey and a lot with Russia, but is the question of how this fits into a broader regional picture. And the press reports that have come through recently about Iranian actions in the area are also disturbing, obviously, to the United States. One of the few things that I think both candidates for president would agree upon is the dangers that Iran poses. How to deal with that, of course, is a thing which they do disagree. So either way, it'd be something that the United States will be watching November 4th onwards. I think I'll turn this over after this to Roshan. Susan, if you want to say something too. But this has been a useful discussion, and I think, again, trying to sort of pull some of this together, and the question of what is possible and how we sort of build from even the tiniest base that we might have, I think is really important. Susan, do you want to jump in with anything?
Yeah, I would just like to say, I agree with what Zlatko said about respecting international norms, ceasefire. But I guess the question I would have for the group, which has been brought up, we're not going to resolve it now, but the role of Russia, and to a certain extent the role of Iran in this, and why now has this come up? And even though Russia is a member of UN Security Council and involved in Minsk group, but is there some way to be able to engage in what is, because I think it's true what many of you have pointed out, that they are, supporting Armenia. I don't know what Iran is doing, but it seems like they also are supporting Armenia. So what is there a way that, that others in the international community can, would have to be, I guess, behind the scenes, because Russia's called for a ceasefire with France and the US, a way to engage them on trying to understand what I think, President Zlatar has pointed out so eloquently, is why are they involved? They may or they may not tell us because they have a different point of view, but that's, I think, part of the key to figuring this out. So I would just throw that out as something for all of us to think about. Is there a way, because the big players are making a difference, and perhaps not in a positive, direction in this. So I throw that out as something for people to think about.
Roshan.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It was really amazing discussion, and I think that it's so important, these days, to have like-minded people to come together and to discuss and to bring up, solutions